All right, I want to welcome all of you to our PolarTREC informational webinar. Today is Wednesday, August 29th, 2018. I'll be presenting most of the time. I'm Janet Warburton, and Judy Fonstock is also online. She's not in the webcam, so. We have a lot of information that we're going to be presenting today, and don't feel bad if you need to leave early or can't stay for the entire webinar. It will be recorded, and we'll post it online and send it out to everyone that registered as well. And of course, we're always around for questions. So if you didn't get your questions answered today, don't worry about that either. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of information that's going to be just me talking and telling you about PolarTREC and how to apply. And it's nice sometimes to follow up on some of the presentation afterwards. So we're available by email. So with that, I'll get started. A few things about the platform we're using. As you can see, there's a webcam, and I'll probably pause it or turn it off a little bit. I just wanted you to see who was talking to you. And there's the list of attendees. There's a public chat area. You can post your questions in there. And the presentation is being shown in the center part of the screen. If you're joining us by phone and weren't able to get online, don't worry about that. Most of you have requested a PDF if you wanted one as well. So that's a little bit about our presentation platform today. Again, the best way is to post questions in the chat box as we go along. A number of you submitted questions when you registered for the webinar, and I'll address those at the end as well. So if you submitted a question on the webinar form, yeah, I'll address those specifically at the end. First thing we're going to cover is kind of introduction of who we are, what is Arcus, give you some background about PolarTREC, the program goals and benefits. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty about the application process and what happens if you're selected or not selected. At any time, if you can't hear me or you're having technical difficulties, also just post those issues in the chat area, and Judy and I will try to get to them as we go along. So who is Arcus? Well, Arcus stands for the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. It's a mouthful. We are a nonprofit, and we've been around for a long time. We have a physical building and space, office space in Fairbanks, and our executive director lives in Washington, D.C., and he has space in there. The rest of us, though, that aren't in Washington, D.C. or Fairbanks, telecommute from around the United States. I'm in Anchorage, Alaska, and Judy Fonstock is in New Hampshire. Arcus runs the PolarTREC program. It's one of our signature programs, and it's the one that focuses on professional development for educators. Arcus itself does a lot more than just education-related program. We work with scientists throughout the Arctic in helping get their science out and communicate it to everyone else in the world. So you can learn a lot more about what Arcus does and some of our other programming at the Arcus website. So what is PolarTREC? As many of you have probably already read online, it stands for Teachers and Researchers Exploring and Collaborating, and it takes place in the polar regions, the Arctic and the Antarctic. It is a professional development program that's been around since 2004. It's had different iterations, but the core has always been to give professional educators a research experience with polar researchers in field locations. And those research experiences go from anywhere from a minimum of 3 weeks to 6, sometimes 8 weeks, but 8 weeks is really extreme. But the average is about 3 to 4 weeks. And it's an opportunity for teachers to be integrated into the research team. Like I mentioned just a little bit ago, it's administered by Arcus, our nonprofit that Judy and I work with. And I'll talk more about the details of PolarTREC coming up. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of who's working behind the scenes, Judy and myself are the primary people. There we go. And we also work with other staff members from Arcus, but they don't work solely on PolarTREC like Judy and myself do. We also work with Ronnie Owens. He's our web guy. I mentioned Bob Rich already. He's our executive director. We have a director of programs, Helen Wiggins. Zeb Pauley is our systems guy. He puts together all of the behind-the-scenes systems for our computers and the servers that Arcus hosts all the PolarTREC website and the Arcus website. And then Zeb Pauley, and they are related, is his brother, and he deals with photos and does actually, he's a really good videographer, and he also does a lot of web content and works with Ronnie, Judy, and myself. So that's kind of the behind-the-scenes team. A little bit about PolarTREC and our goals and our objectives. So I mentioned that in the intro that our whole purpose for the program is a professional development. And this has come about over the years when talking to researchers about what they wanted to, what they want to do with their research. And one of the big things is to share it with others. What are polar scientists doing? And so PolarTREC is kind of, it extends off of that initial request by researchers to get their science out to others. So we developed this professional development program so that educators can increase their STEM content knowledge about the polar regions and also take it back to the audiences that you work with. And whether you're in a formal classroom or a non-institutionalized setting, we want you to be able to take what you've learned in the polar regions and take it back to where you are. Our goal is that you would also take this to the audiences, primarily students that you're working with, and in turn they learn more about the polar regions and have a practical idea about how science can be used and what does scientific research look like. We also want to increase their understanding about what the polar regions are like. When we mention the word polar or the term polar regions, what are we talking about? So that's one of our goals, is to increase their understanding and hopefully inspire future students to take on polar science careers, everything or STEM-related careers. And then we also have another interest in establishing a long-term relationship between the education and research community and helping make those communities so that they can communicate with one another and collaborate more frequently. So those are our goals. The way we look at PolarTREC is that we see it as a set of different components that all work together. There's the hands-on research experience, which is why most people are applying to PolarTREC to begin with. You want to go out in the field, you want to go to the Arctic and the Antarctic, and you want to work with scientists, or you want to have an educator in your team if you're coming from the research side. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is that we build in a lot of activities around is for you to disseminate this experience and the science out to other audiences, whether that be colleagues, the general public that you work with quite a bit, or other professionals. We're also building community, and you'll hear us talk about our alumni network quite a bit. We have over 160 teachers that have participated in field research experiences through PolarTREC, and over a decade of that in time. And so we've built a really large community of researchers and teachers that work together. And so we're trying to keep on building that community. And then we also evaluate how this program is doing. Are we meeting all of our objectives? Are we furthering the professional development of the people that we service? So that's kind of the program components. This is just a quick snapshot of our key program activities. There is a one-week orientation, and I'll go into a little more details about this, and it's also online, but we do a one-week orientation. This year it's going to be in February. The exact dates need to be determined, but it will be in February 2019. And during that week, you get technology training, you learn more about the program, you get some polar science, you hear from researchers and kind of get a background about polar science. And also it's about cohort building and kind of expectations. The other key program activities we have are that we have a really comprehensive selection process, which I'll go over. The researchers are part of that process, and they make the final selections of the teachers that will go into the field with them, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We have logistics providers that are part of our funded, actually they're contracted by the National Science Foundation to provide all the logistical support to the Arctic and the Antarctic. We have funding for substitute and other expenses. We involve our alumni in a number of different ways. Some of them are on the selection committee, but some also come to that one-week orientation or are your partner teachers if you get selected. We have funding for pre- and post-travel support, so this means we try to fund opportunities for teachers and the research team to come together before the expedition and after the expedition. And then we also try to have long-term funding to continue that kind of support. So there, let's see. This is just a projected timeline of what we anticipate will happen this year with some of those major activities, and not to go into all the details here, but you can see that we have made some very, we have some concrete activities that we do throughout the year to hopefully kind of expand off of that 1 week of training and kind of help you take the experience if you're selected throughout the whole year and make the most of it. And that's what this timeline shows. So I think the big thing that you need to realize is that if you get selected, whether you're a researcher that's hosting a teacher or a teacher that's going out with a team, is that you have this about 1 year worth of commitment to the program. And it doesn't mean that you're with us every day and working 8 hours a day on PolarTREC things. It ebbs and waves. Of course, the field experience is really time intensive, but there's also other activities that we'll want you to engage in to make the most out of the experience. So generally, we work with teachers from the current cohort or current group for about a year. So a little more depth about those different components. The teacher research experience is just what it says. This is where you go out into the field with your researcher, and if you're a researcher hosting a teacher, this is when you tell us that you'd like a teacher on your expedition. We want those to be experiences or the time that you're in the field for at least 3 weeks. Our preference is 3 to 5 weeks, I'd say. 6 weeks, I said some expeditions are that long. It just depends on which location and the type of science and the logistics involved. It's usually the opportunity or the basis of this experience is where you become part of the field team and you really work one-on-one with the team and helping the research team collect data, so the teacher becomes an integral part of that team. And the experience also involves any necessary training that you need, whether it be science training or safety training. And then there's several expectations and requirements centered around communicating that outreach out to broader audiences that happen while you're out on that research experience. This is just a map to give you an idea of some of the polar locations that we've placed teachers. As you can see, It's all over the circumpolar Arctic as well as Antarctica. And it includes ocean-based as well as terrestrial-based expeditions. The other thing that, another component is that these experiences or this program is all about professional development. And again, you're immersed in the scientific content, you're working with that research team, and you're bringing those experiences back to your organization. If you aren't a formal classroom teacher or you're working for a non-institutionalized work setting and, or an informal educator, you would bring this experience back to your organization, and we talk to you about what that looks like and what their needs are. Another major component that I mentioned before is this whole area centered around outreach. That's why researchers are very interested in having an educator that on their research team. It's one of the first reasons or their motivations to apply and host a teacher. Part of that is because the National Science Foundation, where most of the polar researchers get their funding from, requires something called broader impacts. And that is basically a way researchers have to describe how they would share their research beyond their current community that they work with, and how does it impact others outside of that community. Tapping into the educator world and using educators on the research team is a great way for researchers to address that broader impacts component of their research project. Researchers are typically not the best science communicators or do a lot of outreach. That's not their job. And they really enjoy having an educator take on some of those tasks for them. And educators by nature are very good at communication. And when you're a science educator, you become really skilled at science communication. So this is where we blend the two fields together and maximize that impact. And so to do so, we have a lot of tools that we've established, and if you look around on our website, you'll see the virtual base camp. You'll see teachers blogging about their experiences, sharing photos. You'll see things called Polar Connect events, which are live, real-time events from the field. We tap social media to share experiences. And then, of course, there's products and videos and things that are produced as well. So this is a melding of the two places, and it's a critical piece of the PolarTREC experience, and it helps the research team get their research out to the public. I mentioned another major component is ongoing support in this community that we're building. Again, we have money, we have alumni, we have people that have been in the network for a long time, we have a database of resources. Most of you probably heard about or saw this announcement through our listserv where we publish other opportunities, and we have international connections with some educators and scientists that are polar focused as well, which you get exposed to and connected to. So a little bit about program benefits. This may be intuitive if you've ever been part of it, but just so you all know. So if you're a teacher, of course, the obvious benefit is you get to go to a really cool place and work with scientists and get to, have a hands-on experience with science and learn a ton about that particular research. The other part is that we work with you so that you have a successful transfer of this experience into your classroom or into your professional world if you're an informal educator. We've heard from teachers that have been through our program that they see this as a rejuvenation, that this experience gives them something that they've been lacking professionally for a while. They like being treated as a professional and as an equal, and and it gives them some credibility when they go back into their work situation. And of course, they can also take everything they learned and really apply it to whatever teaching modules or education program activities you're doing in your at your organization. And several people, both researchers and teachers, have told us it's been a career changer for them, as well as an altering experience personally. What do researchers get? If you're a researcher out there and you're like, why would I spend all this time? I'd have to work with Arcus for a year with my teacher. Well, it's worth it. What you get, and through our process, you get a vetted teacher or an educator to be on your team, and you get a lot of power to pick that person. So it's not Judy and myself going, oh, researcher X, you get teacher X. We do a little bit of that, but you get to really narrow down your prospects and select who you think would be a good member on your team. It's also a very easy way to do outreach. Like I mentioned before, people are good at, educators are good at communicating the science, and they have a whole range of people that they can share it with. So it's a good way to get your outreach out. And you do build these connections with the education community that you might not have had before. I've known of researchers, in fact, a researcher on this slide, Julie Brigham-Grady, has often used the alumni to help teach classes at her university because she knows that they're good at science communication. They know about polar science, and they know how to teach others. So she's used that network to kind of expand her work and connect with the education community. The application process. So the timeline is now. The application period just opened, and it's going to be open until September 24th. And we will need all of the educator applications in by 5 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time on September 24th, and there are no exceptions. We just get too many applications to do to go past and be lenient about that deadline. So please follow that. If you're a researcher, we also ask you to apply during the same time frame. However, if you can't make that deadline, we have a slightly sliding deadline for you, but we want you to contact us about it. And it just has to do with how we review things, that it's a little more flexible for the researchers. We have a selection committee that convenes, and then they review all the applications. So that takes place in October. And thanks, Judy, for the arrow. She's my virtual Vanna. And then we spend a lot of time matching up researchers' applications with teachers that have a similar interest. And so we'll get teacher applications that have said they're interested in this type of science and want to go to this location, and we spend a lot of time matching those with the researcher applications that we have. And then we kind of we narrow it all down, and then we do the next phase is once we have the research applications matched up, the researchers tell us who their top 3 candidates are that they want to interview by video conference call. And we set up the interviews, and then the research team talks to the candidate about their interest in the project and all the details of the project, and conducts an interview, and hopefully by the end of that they'll select a candidate, and then we offer that opportunity to the candidate. And then our goal is by January to have January 1st, the end of the year, to have everybody all matched up. I know one of the questions that came out was how many applicants. We're doing 12 expeditions this year, so by the end of December, we hope to have all 12 expeditions matched up. So 12 educators, 12 researchers, 12 research projects altogether. Our goal is to have in February the one-week orientation for educators. I mentioned that earlier. And then we get a little bit of breathing room. Expeditions start up after that. We have Arctic expeditions usually start anywhere from May to September. And associated with that, we do some pre-field logistics work with pre-field calls where we get everybody together and we talk about all the logistics and make sure that the educator is ready for the experience. Those kind of wrap up, Arctic expeditions kind of wrap up in September, but over the summer we'll start prepping for the Antarctic group and do similar kinds of sequence of events and activities, pre-field calls, and getting them ready to go to Antarctica. There is some of these expeditions and all of the Antarctica ones require what's called a physical qualification. You actually have to have a medical exam before you can deploy to Antarctica. So anyway, and then the Antarctic expedition starts typically in October and run as late as February. So that takes us into the year of 2020. Again, this is just a real quick overview, and if you are selected, we will, of course, go into all the details of what this looks like to you and the expedition that you're part of. So here's some nitty-gritty. I know everyone always asks these questions. Again, it's on the website, so if you miss it, or it will also be in this archive, but feel free to always ping Judy and myself if you have questions about eligibility for this year. So for this year, we're taking teachers, both formal and informal educators that work with grades 6th through 12th grade, middle school and high school. And there is some gray on there in those definitions. So if you aren't sure whether you're eligible or not, please send us a note and we can tell you. Our goal for the informal science educators, and our preference is that you do have a science, that you do something with science. However, we have had art teachers and art educators, history, social sciences, everything, other humanities, things that we've had PE people that have applied to the program. So if you aren't really sure about your eligibility, just send us a note. But our goal is that everybody, whether you're formal, working in a classroom, or you're working at a museum, or doing some other kind of informal education, that your focus is in that middle to high school group, either the students themselves or the teachers that serve those groups. So elder hostels would not count. If you work primarily with elder hostels, for example, that would not be a group. If you're a community college professor, that you wouldn't be eligible for this as well. Any discipline or subject matter is accepted, not just science. I mentioned that. If you are and we've also had librarians. I see Judy talking about a history teacher in the field. We've also had librarians apply to the program as well. Researchers, we're looking for researchers that are primarily funded by NSF or collaborating with an NSF-funded project. So if you aren't, and that's not the case, please give us send us a note and we'll talk to you about it. You do not need to be a U.S. citizen. If you're a researcher, you can apply to the program to host a teacher. Of course, the research project should be in the polar region primarily. There are subpolar projects that are also considered. So, and there's no age restriction for educator or researcher eligibility. An adult, I guess, would be probably the age restriction. Let's see. Hopefully that answers those questions for you. Matching. This gives, kind of going back to that timeline, a little bit of how the whole matching process happens. So we get about 200 or so applications from the educators that apply to the program, and we get maybe, 25, maybe 30 tops researcher applications that apply, researchers that apply. Usually we don't have any issue with the researcher applications. It's more that we have too many teacher ones. So our goal is to narrow that pool of initially 200 applications, educator applications, down to 40. And so it's a serious cutting process, but we have to do it, otherwise it's too difficult to manage. What happens is the selection committee convenes, and the selection committee is made up of alumni, both researchers and teachers, as well as some of the logistics providers participate with us. And they take a subset of applications. They have rubrics to follow, and they review applications, they score them, they talk about them, and they narrow down their pool down to a subset that goes into this final pool of 40. And some of you that have applied before might have seen an email where it says you've made it to the final pool of 40. And we try to do all of that in October. That allows us in November to match up those 40 applicants with the 12 expeditions we've decided are the best expeditions for our year. Of those 12 expeditions that we're going to host, 6 will be ideally in the Arctic and 6 will be in the Antarctic location. That's our goal. And so then we take your application, and there's a section that talks about your scientific interests. Of course, there's the grade level and a bunch of location and your timing that you'd like to go on an expedition. And we match that up with the researchers and kind of have this huge matrix, enormous spreadsheet actually that's kind of hard to deal with. And we figure out who we will send your application to. Which research team. They will get a subset of those, that 40, and then they'll pick their top 3 applicants that they want to interview. So they'll read 10 plus applications and select their top 3. And then you get interviewed. We set that all up. You learn about the project, and at any time as a candidate, if you decide that you don't want to be interviewed, or after hearing more about the research or the timing or the details, you're like, that's just not what I envisioned, or I've got a conflict or whatever, you can always back out of it. It's not a final deal until they offer it to you. And then if you say, yep, you want to do with it, go on that expedition, then we move forward to the next phase, which is really getting you trained up and traveling to Alaska and everything. And so that's kind of our matching process. I know that's kind of quick. I'm sure people have questions about that. And I see if you aren't reading the chat area, Judy's trying to address some of the questions as they come along. I'm not following along in the chat, so if you don't get your question answered there, hopefully at the end we'll be able to do that. The application form, both the teacher and the researcher apps are online at PolarTREC.com. They're a combination of short answer and essay questions. There is a Word document associated with both applications. We highly recommend you download the Word document, fill that out, One, it will save you time when you come to the online web form and you cut and paste things, and if for some reason the web form gets lost and you have to resubmit, you'll have a Word document to go back to and redo it. So I really suggest you download the Word document. Also, you'll want to think about some of your responses to the questions and prepare for them. So that's another way to kind of see what the application is looking for. We do require email addresses. It's very important that your email address doesn't spam out my email, Judy's email, or info, which these instructions are also on the application, because we send you notices and we'll update you about the process as we're going along. And it's also important that you know that the web form does not save any answers. So if you navigate away from that page, you will lose everything you've entered into it. Some people may have, whether you're a researcher that knows a teacher or a teacher that knows a researcher doing polar science, some of you will want to apply with that researcher or educator, and that is fine. Just be aware there's another set of questions that we call the pre-existing supplement, and you'll need to submit those that document at the same time as the online web form. If you have questions about that, feel free to email us. Again, just a reminder about the deadline. They're due Monday, the 24th of September, and at 5 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time. Okay. Some tips about filling out the application. We gave you a Word document. We hope you use it and spell check and proofread your Word document before you cut and paste into the online web form. We do have word limits on some of the essay questions. Most of them are 200 words or less. So please be thorough about and concise with your answers, and make sure that you really are addressing the question that we put before you. Really be clear about your personal and professional goals and how this fits into your long-term strategy and your career, and how you're going to use the experience. You have a lot of people that will be reading your application, so please don't assume they know all the acronyms for education jargon or science jargon, because not everybody's on the same thing. It doesn't know what NGSS means. We have researchers reading these things, and so they don't know what those terms mean. So be clear about your ideas and what you want to do with this experience. Those are the best things. If you've done something or you don't know exactly what we want and you don't know exactly how you're going to use this experience, feel free to elaborate and give us some ideas. Say, well, my idea at this moment would be to do X, Y, and Z. Or in the past, I did a garden and this is the outcome, and I see myself doing a similar type of activity. So feel free to give past examples. Make sure you address all the questions thoroughly. We talked about that. And do your homework. Look through the website and see what other teachers and what other teachers have done with the experience, and also what we provide. We can guarantee you that if you're selected, you're all going to blog, you're all going to take pictures, and you're all going to do video. You're all going to do live events from the field. So don't. You can say that you're going to use those pieces, but expand on it. Don't let that be your core answer, because those are things that we already provide, and they're program requirements. So make sure you look through the website and give us a better idea of how you might use that blog in your classroom or use those videos. How do those videos complement your education and outreach that you already do with the audiences that you work with. And I already mentioned the emails. Okay, things not to do. Sorry if we're really finicky about this, but most of you are educators online, so you know what gets to you. For Judy and myself, it's PolarTREC, not being spelled right. If you really want to get us up in there, up in arms, it would be Arctic and Antarctic, not being spelled right. And another one that comes from the selection committee is really that the experience is more for yourself. We realize that for many of you, this is a dream. I mean, who doesn't want to go to Antarctica? Who doesn't want to go to these really cool places? And we got that part, and that's fine to say that, but don't make that your core message that this has been your dream to always go to all 7 continents. And I have seen that on an application. Yes, it's exciting. We get that, but it should also be about how it makes you a better educator. Make sure that your responses aren't too brief or vague, but they're just thorough, not incomplete answers, and we don't need any additional documentation, lesson plans, etc. So, one important thing that you can do with the web form is that if you do have changes, or maybe you've already submitted your application online, and you're like, I'm going to go back and correct it, just resubmit your application, because what happens is by that deadline, we'll take the most recent application from you. So your most recent time-stamped application that comes through our system is the one that we accept. So if you have minor changes, like your name got misspelled, or it's 30% of this or 100% of other, then you can send us an email and we'll do that. Sorry if I'm getting distracted. Okay. All right, if you're selected, and one thing that we need to mention here is that we're in the process of submitting a proposal for 2019-20 and to NSF, and it will be subject to funding. So it's pending funding, and we keep everybody abreast of what's going on by emails and everything as to whether we've got funding or not. So right now you're applying to a program for 2019-20 that is not yet funded, but hopefully everything will go according to plan and will be funded in 2019-2020. So if we get funding, we'll do that 1-week orientation in Fairbanks. We do provide all the travel related to that, as well as substitutes. We reimburse the schools for that if you're at a school. We don't do any stipends, so if you're at an informal place, organization, or don't have a substitute, I can't give you a stipend, but we pay for all the travel and take care of all those travel arrangements. Same with any of the pre-post field meetings between researchers and teams before you go, or if you go to a conference or something like that afterwards and want to share your experience, we cover that as well. We also give you some equipment, a laptop and a camera, and we do have a GoPro now that we have available for checkout. So we talk to you about what kinds of technology needs you need, and we get that equipment to you. That's part of our 1-week training. We also provide all the outerwear that you need and specialized equipment for working in the field research field, both Antarctica and the Arctic. I already mentioned substitute, and we cover all the travel expenses. So if you're a researcher that's applying, you shouldn't have to expend too much on having an educator outside of your research budget. So we try to provide everything working through our logistics providers. And if you're a teacher that's on their experience, again, we try to minimize everybody's costs and cover as much as we can through our award if we're funded. So this just kind of summarizes what researchers are provided. We work with the NSF logistics providers to cover all the logistics for the educator, which is a lot. We provide the support that's we also reimburse the research team or the educator for anything that's not covered by the logistics provider, so we cover that in our grant. Like I said, we do all the training, we cover all the equipment, we talk about communicating from the field, and we get make sure that the educator that's part of the team is prepared for the expedition. And some of the things that we don't cover for researchers, though, are we don't have money to bring you to the orientation, although we might have some support if you needed some help to do that. We do have money for you to meet your teacher, so that was an error. And we can't do a lot of resources like buying books and materials, but sometimes we have funds for that. So I'd say that that's just kind of mixed depending on what the researcher needs. I see that there's a question down below about researchers and teachers being selected at the same time. Correct. It's a dance between looking at the research teams and making sure they're funded and that they're going to the places that they say they are at the timeline they say they are, and narrowing down the research team and which expeditions are really going to happen, and then and also talking with NSF to make sure that there are places that they want teachers to go. And then at the same time, we're looking at the teacher pool and thinking about, okay, this is the set of research expeditions that look most promising. What's our teacher pool look like? So it's not a blind match, actually. I'm not sure what kind of a match it is, but it's not like we're just saying, oh, this one and you two go together without consideration. It's actually a very thought out process. Okay. Some things that you might incur, I said most things are covered, but we don't cover personal apparel and gear. We do try to reimburse you for any medical or evacuation insurances if they aren't covered by your insurance. For people going to Antarctica in particular, there's a huge medical dental process behind it, and sometimes there's some tests and things that don't get covered by insurance, and if that doesn't get covered, then we usually cover all of those expenses. So there may be something that you might cover that we don't do, like prescription eyewear being one of them. We don't cover salary-related costs. Usually, I've never covered anybody's salary-related cost. If you're doing a lot of outreach activities, sometimes I can reimburse you. It just kind of depends on my travel budget for the year. The big one is that we don't do stipends because that's been asked before. So let's see. Time commitment, I covered this earlier, but basically it's on and off for over a year, and there's a lot of pieces that you can expect to be doing at different times. You'll have some webinars to attend. You've got the 1-week training. You're going to be in the field. You also need to practice. You might need to reach out to the research team to learn more about what kind of science they're doing. They'll do some outreach activities, and we have program requirements. All in all, it takes about a year of time with us, but it's not a year of complete, 8 hours a day type of thing. It's on and off and it really depends on what activity you're covering. For researchers, it's actually a lot less than what the teacher, again, will stay in contact with you for about a year, but we'll ask you to interview and read applications to selecting a teacher. We have some webinars, we have some logistical phone calls and activities that you'll need to participate in. You'll have to share and communicate with the educator about what's happening in the field, and then you might end up doing some outreach activities with them. Let's see. I didn't get picked, now what? If we get funded, we encourage you to apply again the next year. One way to really figure out what's happening with PolarTREC is, of course, to follow an expedition. We've had alumni, we've had candidates in the past talk about either joining Polar Connect events or following a certain teacher. And I think if you do those things, you get a better sense of what the whole experience is about. And it does help with some of your answers if you do reapply. We encourage you to post questions and really interact and engage with that community. So now you've learned all about these resources. You know, take advantage of them. That's what they're there for. We wish we could send everybody out into the field, but we can't. So, but there's a lot of material out there, and you can still connect with that alumni and the research community. So take advantage of building your own network and reaching out to the teachers or the scientists, even if you didn't get selected. Some of these things I just mentioned. We do have an online resource database, all the products, lesson plans, activities, videos, etc. that the community has put together or participants have put together are in that learning resource database. It's a wealth of information, and you should take advantage of it. We have the education listserv. There's also the Arctic Info, which is an Arcus listserv, which has a lot of research networks and activities, so I encourage you to join that. Become a member of APEX, Arcus, and PEI, 3 international polar-focused organizations. It will definitely connect you, even if you haven't gone out in the field. There are some great activities. So if you haven't looked up any of those organizations or become a member of Arcus, APEX, or PEI, and APEX is Alaska Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, and PEI is Polar Educators International, and of course Arcus is our organization. And there's always an ever-growing polar science education community, so please join us. All right. Judy, I'm going to put up the frequently asked questions, but you can tell me if any of them have been addressed or you need to reiterate it because it came through chat or something. So let me ask you first, Judy, are there any questions in chat that should be, we should make heard to everyone and reply in case they missed it?
Excuse me, no, I think I've covered most of them. If anybody wasn't clear about my response in the chat, please respond again in the chat and we'll go over it. So I think we can, in going through your questions, how many people are accepted, we already discussed that. There will be 12 expeditions this year, correct? And age restrictions for participants? No. The main requirement is that you are an educator, either a formal educator in the classroom or an informal educator like in a museum, and are working with the age groups of middle school and high school, which is usually grades 6 through 12. What types of background are you looking for? Here I would say, again, it's more about what you will do with the experience, not what specifically you work with. There was a question earlier about whether there has been any medical or health science researchers in recent years, and Janet can probably answer that better because she has the memories from way back, but in the years that I've worked with it, I don't know of any, but like I said, we have a history teacher right now that's out in the field, so it really depends on how you convey what you'll do with your experience and in both your educating community and then the outside that specific community, like in your town or your Cub Scout group or things like that. So are there any specific fields or areas of interest that need to, I skipped one. How many areas of interest need to be high in order to create a competitive application? Janet, do you want to answer that?
That's where you're looking, so there's a section on the application where you check off, I think it's like 0 through 5 or something, or maybe it's just low, medium, and high interest. I can't remember. But anyway, you're checking off whether you're interested in that field of science, so atmospheric or physical science or biological or sea ice or, those are the, variety of choices. The answer is they don't need to be high. Be honest about your answers and your interest in those fields of science, because that's how we'll start to match you with the researcher applications we have. So if you are not really interested in oceanographic science and get seasick all the time and would be miserable if we put you on a ship, don't make that your top area of interest, because that's not your area. I mean, it doesn't help you competitively at all. It's how we match you. So be honest.
Okay. Are there any specific fields in which you would like the teachers to have general or specific knowledge of? Again, such as what subject you are working with. I think the sky is really the limit here. We have some people that definitely work in science and teaching science. They're also very active in environmental education or doing a lot of camping and that kind of stuff. And then we have other teachers that go out that have had no experience in camping or really don't do any active outdoor activities per se that are chosen also. So I would say general common sense and the want to really learn the science when you go out with the researchers and learn as much as you can and bring it back to your classroom or learning areas. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Janet?
Nope.
Okay. So the same with, let's see, are there any special skills required for teachers to be considered? Did we just answer that? No. Again, do your teachers generally have any research experience? Again, we can have some that apply that have experience, but oftentimes we feel that the people that would probably gain the most from this program can be people that don't have any research experience. So there definitely are teachers who have gone out that have maybe some experience or just work with their own classrooms on doing research experience. But it's fine not to have any experience at all, because that's what we're hoping you will get through a PolarTREC experience.
Yeah, just one clarification, that if you're a PolarTREC or TEA alumni, PolarTREC or TREC alumni, and probably even TEA, you shouldn't apply to PolarTREC. We don't accept those because those are the they're the same program. However, if you were NOAA Teachers at Sea, Armada, Andrill, or National Geographic Fellow, those kinds of things, Einstein Fellow, you can apply. You just need to really explain how this experience is going to add to that research experience that you've already had.
Okay. Are applicants given specific feedback if they are not successful in their application? So this, in general, is if you are chosen, if you get as far as the researcher and you're not chosen, oftentimes that just has to do with what the researcher is looking for. And we, don't know the specifics of that. I mean, we have a general idea, but unless we get feedback from the researcher, we won't know. As far as if you don't make it to the researcher, if the selection committee has specific comments that they write down, we can relay them. But in general, we don't want to have many people writing us and asking us, well, how come I wasn't selected, or what did I do wrong, or what can I change if I want to apply again? Because a lot of time, again, it's Janet and I have like the very first bit of the application process where we are doing a very, very thin screening, and then after that it really goes to the selection committee and then again to the researchers. So, as an informal educator, one that teaches STEM to students on Saturdays during the school year, would I be eligible to apply? Depending on, well, I'm going to let Janet answer that one. Janet is in a new location. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I was muted and I moved. Okay.
So very last one.
Yeah, well, last one on that piece. I think you need to fill out the application or give us some more details about what kind of informal educator you are. And yeah, I can't probably answer that one on the fly. So probably send an email a little more detailed about what you're talking about and what you do on a day-to-day basis, and then we can go from there. Do you want to take the rest, Judy, or you want me to jump in?
I can start through them, and if I have any questions, I'll defer to you. Are there participation opportunities for geology and earth sciences in the expeditions? So as you know, we just have researchers applying right now, and it really depends year to year as to what the expeditions are. In general, I would say there is almost always some sort of a geology or earth science expedition. But that being said, we also have some that are just on ships and doing other things. So in general, there's usually one or two, I would say, per year. Are there opportunities to take or analyze core sample sets? That would be up to the researcher if you're chosen, and you and I would say more likely the researchers, if they've been working on this project, may have sample sets that they will share with you, data sets. I'm not saying always, but oftentimes they'll have something they can share with you. And it depends on where they're working, whether they can take extra cores and things with them or not. Some of the areas that they're working in are threatened or endangered or sensitive areas, and I don't think they want to dig extra stuff out. So that would be between you and the researcher. What type of research might we be doing related? Do you get to pick the research project, or are you assigned to one based on the skills and interests? So this, I think Janet already went through if you have any more questions about that, you can write them in the chat. What are the dates? That, again, also we went through, so if you have any questions, ask in the chat. Are there any opportunities for polar scuba diving as part of the research? Well, as a matter of fact, we did have a teacher go 2 years ago down to Antarctica, and he was a certified scuba diver, and he did do some diving down in Antarctica in very, very cold waters, but super cool pictures on sea spiders and stuff. So if you get a chance to visit on the website, the expedition camps, you can look up Timothy Dwyer, and you'll see some really cool photos. Requirements. What are the expectations of the teachers with regard to your program? Janet went through all that. If you are chosen, we spend a fair amount of time going over that, especially the education and outreach components, and journaling and a live event. So that's all on the website. So check out the website. Are social studies, world history teachers eligible? You bet. We've got one out right now. If yes, any tips for teachers applying from this discipline? Again, it's what you will do with what's the expedition. So the teacher that we have right now is a history teacher. I don't even remember during the interview thinking, oh, she's a history teacher, because she was so broad-based and talking about what she wanted to do with the information and where she would, what communities she was hoping to take it to, and what she would do with it in her classroom and in her schools. So it really, it doesn't matter what you're used to teaching. How specific do our plans for implementation have to be before the trip? As an informal educator, our programs change often, and opportunities may change between application time and implementation time. Before you head out to the field, there are checklists of things that you need to do in the education outreach portion of the program. These, before you head out, are usually left in draft form because just in this situation, you may well change what you end up doing after you come back from your experience. So again, they're just in draft form, nothing formal in the beginning, and then they get formalized when you come back. Okay. Ooh, and there's other questions. Besides having support from the school administration, if this is to take place during the school year, would I be responsible for covering the cost of a substitute teacher during my absence? The question is no, you would not. Arcus does pay for the substitute teacher while you're away. So just during the time while you're on the expedition, yes, Arcus will reimburse your school for your substitute. If accepted to the PolarTREC program, are there opportunities to be in contact with the researchers and team members after the expedition to share their experiences with our students? Definitely. PolarTREC has some funding. We use often for trips before the expedition and after the expedition, whether it's teachers going to see the researchers again, possibly working with data or some of the samples that you picked up when you were out in the field after you've done the expedition, or also having the researchers come to your classrooms to talk about their research and what you all did. So there's definitely funding for that, and we encourage teachers and researchers to use it. Does the PolarTREC program count towards any continuing education credits? This one I'm going to give to Janet. I think the answer is yes, but I'm going to give to Janet.
Good response. Yes. We just work with you if you need continuing education credits, and a university of your choice of where you'd like those to come from, I should say. So the answer is yes. It takes a little bit of legwork on your end to make it all happen, but it has happened for others.
Do the educators participate in PolarTREC during the 2019 field season ever meet one another to discuss their experience, curricular materials, etc.? This is a great question. So everyone initially meets each other before their expeditions at the orientation. And a great example of this past year is, we had our usual group of teachers, but a lot of them connected together. And a number of them are using the money that you would also use to go to a meeting or to see a researcher to actually connect with each other and present at similar meetings together. So, in answer to your question, no, they don't specifically have one time when all the educators meet together again after the expeditions. We do have video calls where everyone meets and we have sort of a final session where the educators present slides, just a couple of slides about their expedition and what they learned, and show some awesome pictures from their expedition, that kind of stuff, and what they're doing with it afterwards. But the teachers, we leave it up to the teachers. If they want to be in touch with each other, they can. And if we can help them collaborate by working on posters together or some sort of lesson plans together, then we will help with that. Okay, will I be able to access the webinar after? Of course. We are recording the webinar now, and it will be put online within the next few days, and I say by Tuesday after Labor Day, everyone should have, everyone who registered will have an email waiting for them with the link on the archive for this webinar. Janet?
Yeah, some good questions. And like we said at the very beginning, if you didn't get your question answered, or even after you review all this material, you still have questions or you need clarification, or you just aren't sure about something, just send an email to info@polartrec.com, and that comes to Judy and myself, and we'll respond to it. And with that, this is just a last reminder that the applications are due September 24th at 5 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time. Look on a world clock somewhere to figure out what that means in your time zone. There is 2 separate applications, one for teachers, one for researchers. If you're working with a researcher or a teacher already, you can make sure you fill out that pre-existing application. And I think that's it. Give us a couple of days to get this archive up and on the web and sent out to all of you. And both Judy and I wish you the best of luck on your application process, and keep asking those questions. Good luck and good night.